Hey, welcome everyone to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. We're back again. Today we have a gentleman who's on the other side of the pond. He's in England. His name is Stephen Baker. Stephen is a former courtroom lawyer. He's a former professional poker player, and he's taken a deep dive into the subconscious mind and how it impacts us. Stephen, welcome to Pro Mindset today.
Hey, great to be with you, Craig. Thank you for having me.
Okay. We talked a little bit off the air on the heels of the World Cup. We got to dive right into the World Cup. How disappointed were the fans in England about England getting eliminated in the semis? You got two wonderful forwards that both can score. How did the country at large support, be disappointed, all those kind of things related to the England's pursuit of the championship?
Yeah, there was disappointment. I mean, on the one hand, you have to accept that when you're in the final four of the World Cup, the team you're facing is likely to be pretty good and, you can lose. I think what's disappointing is the manner of the way we lost, because really what happened is we go a goal up and then we really turn inwards and we defend. Now, what we can never know completely is how much of that was down to conditioning. Although the truth of the matter is the Premier League is very, very intense. The players are used to playing intense football. I think there was definitely an element at the management level of sort of circling the wagons a little too early. We took off attacking players and we brought on defenders and just said, hey, we're going to just defend our own penalty area. And this is where we come into the issue, which is going to be what we're going to discuss today, I know, is going to be mindset. The mindset was, hey, we stopped doing what we did to get into the lead. We dominated the first half. We continue like that at the beginning of the second half. And instead of carrying on that way, we said, oh no, okay, we're now going to go into defending. And of course, what that did was it gave Lionel Messi the time and the space to do what he does. And in the first half, he was completely denied that. So I think there was a mindset issue there, which was at least part of why England lost. So I think that's the disappointment.
Well, you make a very good point. I think there's two elements to the mental aspect of soccer. I'm probably oversimplifying it, but one is when you score first, a lot of managers and coaches change their strategies because it's difficult to score when you've got a lot of defenders, and they move into a defensive mode. And it backfires sometimes because the guys get on their heels. It's not as much fun. I mean, you're not even doing a counterattack to try to score because you're just trying not to let them score.
Yeah.
And then I think the second part of it is when you're behind 1-0, what do you got to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. And you take away by taking off your attacking players. I mean, we kept on Harry Kane, but Harry Kane is not blessed with pace. And he ended up coming very deep. We took off Anthony Gordon, who, fine. He put in a big shift, but they brought on Dan Burn to just head the ball away. But what we did was we took away any sense of jeopardy for Argentina, because they knew that basically we didn't have the pace to get up the field. As you say, we didn't have any counter-attacking threat. And I think that was the mistake. And as I say, I think there's a mindset issue there. And you saw it in the players and you saw it in the manager. I mean, I've talked about the manager and I think the substitutions he made, but there was another element, and you see it in football time and again. And it's like the midfielders drop really deep into their own penalty area. They're virtually on the defender's toes. And I'd want my central defensive leader saying, get off my toes, push up to the ball a bit more. I'll bring us out. I'll bring us up to the edge of the penalty area and we'll defend not virtually on our own goal line, which is almost the way it turned into in that last 20 minutes.
Yep. Okay. So let's talk about the subconscious. Why don't you shared off air real quick that 20 years ago, you wouldn't believe you would be where you're at today. Why don't you describe what your journey on a subconscious road that you've been on, how it's impacted how you show up, how it's impacted your career, how it's impacted how you make other people's lives better, and how
Yeah.
it's maybe most importantly how it's changed your life. Those are a lot of questions, but just give us a perspective on your journey with the subconscious.
Yeah. So, I mean, my career started as a courtroom lawyer, what we call a barrister in England. So those are the guys who stand up in court and do the advocacy. Back in my day, we wore wigs and gowns, all that stuff you might have seen on courtroom dramas. And that was the first time it was a high performance environment. And I definitely experienced days when I performed well and days where I performed less well. And so that was my first real sense of, okay, how is pressure operating on me? And also, how am I responding to the fact that in that environment, it's no good just turning up and producing a big performance one day. It's about how you show up day after day after day. The client for whom you're performing today doesn't care that you were brilliant yesterday. That wasn't their case. Today is their case. You've got to perform. So that was the start of my career. And it kind of brought about an interest in performance. Then in my early 40s, I had created a law firm. It had grown incredibly. It was very successful. But I felt disconnected from what I was doing. I moved away from being in court so much, and I was now really just a manager almost of my own business. And I had that feeling that I was unfulfilled and I didn't want to just keep doing that for the rest of my working life. And I was looking for a new challenge. And so I sold my share in the law firm and I became a professional poker player. And I think a lot of people thought I was nuts. And for a while, I questioned myself. I mean, I'd made money playing recreationally. I'd made good money playing recreationally. But this is an interesting thing because this is where pressure plays its part. As a lawyer, I was making plenty of money. And so when I played poker, there was no pressure on me at all. If I made money playing poker, that's just icing on the cake. If I didn't make money, okay, it would have just been a hobby. Most people's hobbies don't make money. So I'd done well at poker, playing as an amateur, as a recreational player. I then quit. And then the first year of my professional poker career, I really felt pressure because although I'd taken a good sum of money from my own law firm, I still needed to make money. I was still relatively young and I had children and so on. And it was really important that I made ends meet and made this new career work. And I felt the pressure. And I was making decisions in that first year of my professional poker career, which I knew were suboptimal. There were spots where I knew, for example, I should be folding hands and I was unable to do it. And a lot of the conventional poker coaching, there's a book out there called The Mental Game of Poker. And the guy makes you do exercises. It's a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy. And you go through and say, what's my logic here? What should be my logic in this spot? Well, the logic was very simple a lot of the time. When the other guy makes a big aggressive play, most opponents don't do that. You should fold your hand. It's quite simple, but I was unable to do that. I found myself instinctively just saying, call. And I tried everything until I reached out to somebody who became my mentor, who used hypnotherapy as his way of coaching. And I went through a session with him. I did a number of sessions with him, and we found that I had a pattern of wanting to escape from anxiety inducing situations. I would find a way to get out of them as quickly as possible. And that was what was happening at the poker table. I was making quick, impulsive decisions just to bring the situation to an end. I was finding it stressful, so I'd make a quick, impulsive decision. And I had the hypnotherapy and it changed. I stopped doing it. And basically, it was at the point where I was a year into my professional poker career and I was thinking, hey, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not good enough for this. And then it completely changed. I was able to make the decisions I wanted to under pressure. And I went on to have basically another decade making good money in poker. And really after that, I became fascinated with this and I looked into the science of hypnotherapy, which really wasn't part of the medical mainstream, but the science is compelling. For any of your listeners, there's an MD and an academic at Stanford called Dr. David Spiegel. And Stanford have done an amazing study using functional MRI scans, which shows the beneficial impact of hypnotherapy on the brain. And why hypnotherapy is so important is it's because it's our subconscious. So many of our decisions are made subconsciously. And so much coaching at the moment ignores the subconscious. It just tells people, hey, you shouldn't think like this. Don't do that. Do this. Well, I already knew that. Most of my clients are smart people, right? They come to me saying, hey, I don't do what I want to do under pressure. And it's no good just saying to them, yeah, don't do that. They already know what they should and shouldn't be doing, but impulsively, their subconscious is driving them to do something different. The footballer who chokes when they're one on one with the keeper, they can do that easily in practice. They know how they should finish, but under pressure, all sorts of stories are coming into their head in the moment about what happens if I miss. It's fear. Our subconscious is often driven by fear, and fear is trying to protect us, but it often does it in an exaggerated way, which is unhelpful in those moments. So I looked into the science of this because I'm very evidence based. And yeah, as I mentioned to you before we came on air, if you'd have said to me a few years before, you're going to find that this is going to change your life, it's going to change your performance, I'd have said, you've got to be kidding. But it completely changed the way I performed. It also changed my general sense of being relaxed, being able to be in control under pressure situations. That would have been super helpful in court at times, because definitely on the more difficult occasions, just finding that level where you get into a flow state is really, really important. And this is the work I do.
Okay, Stephen, what you just shared with me is fascinating to me. Fascinating. And the reason why is because every single one of us has behavioral patterns and like instinctive responses to pressure situations. And two different people can be in the same situation and feel different pressure and have different patterns. But the thing they both have in common is that their subconscious is controlling them and not their conscious. So let's pretend there's a battle between, let's say somebody hasn't had hypnotherapy. They don't know the science behind all this stuff, but they do know one thing. When they're in a big moment, when it's a pressure moment, they choke. They have, suboptimal performance in that moment. They know it and everybody else knows it. So the first like action they take is they start like talking themselves into, hey, I'm better than that. It's all superficial stuff.
Yeah.
What does hypnotherapy do that allows you to actually make real change?
So the way hypnotherapy works is it speaks to your subconscious, and your subconscious is by evolution a fast acting system. Now, Daniel Kahneman talks about something very similar in Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman, the late Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winning psychologist. And for anybody who hasn't read it, Thinking Fast and Slow is a wonderful book. And what he talks about is the way what he calls the system one fast thinking part of our brain operates a lot, and it makes a big impact on our decisions. Now, if you're in a pressure situation, that part of your brain will kick in. Now, by default, the software in it is very driven by fear because it's got an evolutionary component. And when we feel something which is stressful, our brain will go into a fight, flight, or freeze situation, sort of response. Now, that can be genuinely useful in some situations. If you found yourself, heaven forbid, in a situation on the street where somebody tried to attack you, well, then you do want your brain to go into that mode. But that mode really was much more relevant when we were hunter-gatherers, all those years ago, because that was really the reality of our daily lives as a species. But it's not the reality, mercifully, now. And therefore, that very simplistic response of fight, flight, or freeze is not really what we want in these situations. So, for example, in a sporting context, you're taking a penalty in the World Cup, to be topical, you're taking a penalty That is not an existential threat. It's disappointing, of course it is, and it does matter whether you get that penalty, but it's not the same as an existential threat. And you just want your brain to be able to process it in the right way. So what we do with hypnotherapy is train our responses, because one of the reasons why some people respond badly to pressure compared to others is because they have learned a response and that response is suboptimal. So, and I come across this in lots of contexts. I'll give you a context from a client of mine who's an entrepreneur, and he's incredible at what he does. He has amazing ideas. He's come up with an amazing product, but he has to go into meetings. He has to pitch. And the one thing he finds really difficult is speaking in public. And when we did hypnotherapy, we traced it back to an incident at school where he had to read in class, and he stumbled over his reading and the teacher didn't handle it particularly well. His classmates laughed at him. And ever since then, his brain has learned a pattern, which is, hey, avoid this situation, which kind of works until it doesn't. And it's not now, because he now needs to go into meetings and he needs to pitch his amazing idea. Again, I've come across this. I work with a lot of professional poker players. Really interesting example. A client moved up to high stakes and was finding it really difficult to bluff some of the better players in the game. And you've got to bluff sometimes. And we did hypnotherapy, and he went back to a memory of being on the school bus, and the school bully was on the bus, and he just kept a low profile. He wasn't actively, bullied on that occasion, but his response was to just keep a low profile, which made a lot of sense, right? If the school bully's on the bus, just keep your head down. But he was then taking that. His brain had learned a message, which is, hey, don't put your head above the parapet. Don't do anything to draw attention to yourself. But his brain was interpreting that in his current context as, hey, just keep your head down, never bluff. So we learn lessons as we go through life, but some of those lessons, we don't learn the right ones. Our brain can be maladaptive. And also some of this simplistic evolutionary programming just doesn't make sense. We tend to be very loss averse. And so the human mind tends to overestimate risk and underestimate opportunity. So this is how hypnotherapy can effectively change the way you are thinking about these pressure situations.
Okay. I totally jam with all of that. Here's where my brain's going. You got a 5-year-old kid. You have a 5-year-old son, 5-year-old daughter who hasn't had all that trauma yet. So they
Yeah.
don't need hypnotherapy to unlearn their responses. Has anybody ever built out a program so that young people can learn how to deal with fears and how to deal with these situations so that they don't have to unlearn something because they perhaps learn it correctly the first time? Is that impossible? Like, let's narrow this down.
Mm.
Take it into sports. Let's just take it down to soccer.
Yeah.
The first time a young man, let's just use a young boy playing soccer,
Yeah.
has a one-on-one and doesn't, and blows the opportunity, kicks it right to the keeper. Coach response, parent response, and teammate response.
Yeah.
Is all going to be like, hey man, you blew it. That was
Yeah.
your chance. You blew it. So now that's the first. So my understanding is you don't even remember it unless it had an emotional impact on you at that time. So because people are saying you blew it, we lost the game because of you, that is a memory that sticks because you
Yeah.
have that's an emotional moment. It's not
Absolutely.
the moment. One more thing. It's not the moment that you kicked the ball. It's the moment after that when people responded to you not kicking the ball very proficiently. So my
Absolutely.
question, so go with it. Go with it.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And so, I mean, it's a good example, and it's one that resonates with me because I did coach a junior football team. And firstly, we had a rule that parents should only be encouraging from the sidelines. They should not be coaching from the sidelines. They just applaud. That's it. Secondly, one of the things I said to all of the boys in my team, in fact, it was boys and girls, hey, we only encourage our teammates. We only give positive messaging. If somebody misses, we just say, hey, nice try. you know, Also as a coach, you want to encourage, to use your specific example, one of the things that's going to happen as a striker in soccer is you're not going to score every time you have a chance. You have to be prepared to miss. And you see it even at a high level. As I was telling you before we came on air, I'm a Liverpool supporter. And I do remember there was a player called Dirk Kuyt, very good player, had a great career at Liverpool. And you definitely say that mentally he was strong. But I remember there was a phase where things were not going well for him in front of goal. And you started to see him take up positions where he was not really in a position to score. And it was pretty clear to me that the way his mind was working, it was, hey, I don't want to miss. So therefore I won't put myself in a position to miss. But guess what? You're not putting yourself in a position to score either. So you have to, coming back to your question about children, one of the really important messages is, and this can apply to sports and everything else, is don't worry about your failures. Just keep trying. Because let's face it, that's the reality of life for all of us. We have plenty of projects, whatever they are, which won't succeed. As long as we're making a reasonable calculation of the risk to reward, be prepared to accept that some of those risks won't come off. That's just normal. So I think that's the best we can do with children, is just encourage them to just be prepared to fail. And that's a message that should come from teachers, parents, coaches. It's harder to say to your peers or I remember I was teaching or coaching children who were really, I started at 6-year-olds and we went up to about 12, 13. It's hard, but you have to try and create a culture which says, hey, we do not criticize people for missing, for failing with a pass, for whatever mistake. It's a mistake. So that's hard to coach. And yeah, the example I gave you before of my client who, had that experience in the classroom when he was reading, part of that was the response of his classmates, which were kind of sadly semi-encouraged by the teacher's response. And it just shows the impact that can have on somebody, somebody who's very capable going forward in their life. So I think that's the best we can do. You're going to be very lucky if you go through life without some kind of experience on those lines. But I think there's more that teachers, coaches, parents can do to minimize it, to answer your question.
Well, one of the things that keeps coming in my mind is the concept of, with parents, they tend to criticize. And the reason why they criticize is because they think the kid's performance reflects on their parenting skills, their parenting proficiency, their parenting worth. And so parents have to understand that their kids are going to do what they do. Sometimes it's going to be beautiful. Sometimes it's going to be less than perfect. And it doesn't reflect on you. It doesn't there's not a scoreboard on all the parents on the sidelines on whether your son or daughter actually scores the goal they should or doesn't.
Yeah.
And then right? So like parents are attached to their children's success or failure too closely. The second thing is when you coach youth in any sport, there's there's three challenges. One is the teaching technique. You've got to teach the skills, the rules of the game, strategies, spacing, all those different things. That's a lot. And that's what I would say 99% of coaches focus on. The
Yeah.
second one is really how to view success and failure. So, for example, like, let's say, I love to use the example of a young child learning to walk. Moms and dads in those moments are so positive. Try again. The kid takes a half a step and falls. Try again. They're so positive. But then sometime later in life, it's like, well, dude, you screwed up. What were you thinking? You know better
Yeah.
than that, right? But if you can keep your coaching at that 1-year-old level when they're learning to walk, great shot, great hey, hey, you took the shot. Compliment them on taking the shot. Don't criticize them for missing the shot.
Yeah.
And then, right? And then maybe the third thing is teaching them on how to process failure
Yeah.
and reminding them that guys like Tom Brady threw more incompletions than anybody on the planet, and he's thought of as the best NFL quarterback of all time. And LeBron
Yeah.
James at basketball in the NBA, he's missed more shots than anybody in history. I mean, it's no mistake that these guys played a long time, made a lot of shots, made a lot of completions, but they also missed a lot because they're human.
And this is absolutely agree with you. A couple of points here. Number one, when I look across all of the people I work with, I do work with people in professional sport. I do work with traders. I work with entrepreneurs. I work with professional poker players. I would say if I could give anybody a superpower, it would be the ability to recover from difficult moments, the ability to suffer well, because in all of those realms, it's never a cakewalk, right? I mean, we can all, when things are going well, we can all perform well. But the question is, how do you perform when you're under the cosh? And the ability to say, hey, I've just missed that chance, or I've just started a business. I thought it was going to succeed, but it hasn't succeeded. What do I do next? Now, this isn't saying, seek out failure for the sake of it. We always, whenever we make a decision, be it on the sports field or in business or in the courtroom, do I make that point in my closing submissions or not? These decisions, we try and balance risk and reward, and it's very rarely clear, but we try and do the best we can. But our job is always then to recover when it doesn't go well. And the people, I would say, everybody I work with has that ability. It's certainly something we cultivate, and it's not always easy to be able to recover, to suffer well in those difficult moments and come back. I honestly think if I could give everybody one superpower, that would be it. The ability to suffer well and to come back in the next moment. The second point I'd make, it's interesting, on the parenting issue, I agree with you, but I'd add this as well. I think a lot of parenting, which can go the way you described, comes from a place of fear that you want so much for your children, everything to go well, and you fear. And again, this is the way the human mind works. We tend to catastrophize a little. If my child doesn't do well at school, then this is it's going to go so badly for them. And then you place excessive pressure on them. So it comes from a good place very often that you're just wanting the best for your child, but you have to also, as you say, try and remember that, that much more encouraging mindset. You're absolutely right. It is amazing how we change. By the time they're 13, 14, it's, as you say, it's like, hey, come on, sort yourself out. That's rubbish. Whereas, yeah, those first few steps, it's like, oh, isn't that brilliant? Yeah, you fell over, but it's okay. Go again. And yeah, you're 100% right. From a coaching viewpoint, if you can keep that mindset of, yeah, you're trying your best, recognizing when somebody's trying their best, sure, giving them a steer where there's a shortcut or something that can help them understand better. But once you understand that somebody is trying their best, just sticking with them and encouraging them to try again, that's a parenting and coaching superpower.
Let's unpack the superpower of recovery. And when you were talking about that, in professional sports, the people that play for a long time, that play at the highest levels, have that ability.
Yeah,
They just do. And the last failure, the last mistake, the last error that they made, they don't bring it with them to the next play, to the next minute of the game. And I think that what I've learned is that it's an identity issue. When
absolutely.
what you do, when what you do is who you are, you can't get rid of it.
Yeah,
But if who you are is who you are and what you do is just what you do and they're separate, then you can shake it off. You can move forward. And so we are human beings, not human doers. And when you realize you're a human being that does things and not a human doer that is defined by what you do, that's like the first step in being able to recover.
Yeah,
Thoughts on
absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. I think some people carry the mindset that when they fail, it means they and their whole identity has failed, and they carry that with them. And again, this is something we often carry with us and have learned and acquired at a subconscious level. If you were that person who maybe all the way through school was great at academics, whatever it is, academics, sports. The reality is you go up and up. I mean, I remember this with sports. I remember it academically as well. There comes a point where, I found, for example, the academics I found really easy. And then guess what? You get to court and you're against other people who are pretty smart. And you can't just have the mindset of, okay, I can just breeze through this and just blow everybody away effortlessly. I remember the first time I sort of went from school level to county level at sport. And all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, everybody's pretty quick here. Everybody can run well. And again, if your mindset is, hey, I'm the man, and your whole identity is tied to that, and then you lose. That's a tough moment, and you've got to be able to have a mindset which says, "Hey, no, yeah, I still have value. I'm doing this thing, as you say, but I've got to improve, and that's okay. I don't take it as a complete assault on my self worth to have not succeeded." That's a really common problem. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why so many people again, I go back to some of the other client types, professional poker, entrepreneurs. A lot of people give up because they go through a rough spell. It's completely normal. And it's normal in sport, isn't it? You will see a great player go through a dry spell where they cannot make a shot for love nor money. But the really great players will come out of that, and they will, but they only get to see the other side of that because they stuck at it, because their sense of identity was not challenged to the point where they just wanted to run away and quit in the face of that, what was effectively a temporary failure. So again, this kind of brings me back to the superpower of the ability to suffer well. That is absolutely the superpower, because if you're doing anything challenging, any project, any career, there will be moments, there will be periods which are just tough. They're just tough. And your ability to say, I'm fine, I can survive this. It doesn't challenge my whole sense of worth. That's the real superpower. You can come out of it and you can go again.
Okay, Stephen, I think that our subconscious, the story we tell ourselves, the self-talk we have, the volume gets turned up in two situations, probably in many, but two that come to my mind. One is when the outcome is so important, like a championship game, an interview for a job, potentially a court case where you might get a promotion. The second time is like, and this happens, I see it all the time, and you mentioned it even in your own sports career. In a small pond, you can be really, really talented. The pond gets a little bit bigger, you can still be really, really talented. But then you move into a lake, not as, hey, you got to pick your spots. Maybe you can't play every position. There's only certain positions you can play because you're not talented enough to match up with the other people. Then you move into the ocean and you're not even thinking about where you're going. You're looking behind at the same time because you could be eaten by a shark. Let's just use professional sports. It can be soccer, football, it can be anything you want it to be. On any given day, you could get embarrassed. You could get your
Yeah.
lunch handed to you because the guy that you're competing against is really, really good too. So what's the point here? How does our subconscious show up when the outcome is not certain, could go either way, compared to when you know you're going to win or you know you should win? And because I'll wrap this comment up in the sense of, I've seen it in the NFL so many times. A guy's a superstar in college, he goes to the pros. And it's a wake up call because everybody in the locker room is really good.
Yeah.
Even the third string guy is really good. And all of a sudden, they start experiencing doubt, fear of failure, and they can't even perform at the level they're capable of because their mind is pulling them down.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the reality. These subconscious programs we're talking about, they will show up most under pressure. And where that is for a given individual will depend on their abilities. If you're a superb athlete or you're amazing at your knowledge profession, for example, you're a trader or you're a lawyer, it will show up only in the edge cases. But of course, those tend to be the biggest cases. In sport, it will be probably the biggest game of your life. But that's where we then uncover if there is a problem in those mental programs you're carrying, your identity, the way you respond to pressure. I'll give you an example, actually. I mean, one of the first guys I coached when I was in professional poker, I coached this guy technically, in other words, how to play poker better. And he always struck me as an incredibly smart guy. But at the time, I was just teaching poker and how to play poker well. And his results were pretty, I'm going to be honest, mediocre. And I was working for this in professional poker. You have these investment groups, backing groups, and they back players. And I couldn't work out why this guy was not making money because he always seemed to be pretty smart. And then I went into this side of the coaching business, the mindset and the psychology side. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, Stephen, I just mentally blow up in these big final table situations." He was a tournament player. And we did some work and we went right back to situations from earlier in his life where he'd felt things had been unfair. And he had a mental program which, when things went wrong, he felt there was an unfairness. And he got so wound up with the unfairness that he stopped thinking clearly. You know, think of professional sport. There will be calls from a referee, some of which may be wrong. They may be unfair, or you may just perceive them as unfair. But guess what? They're not going to change those calls. And your job is to get on with it and to perform your best, irrespective of those calls. And we did this work, and then he went on, and to cut a long story short, he won effectively the equivalent of an Olympic medal in poker. He won a bracelet. And he said, I was completely different at the final table. And what that was changing that mental program, which was stopping him from performing under pressure. The interesting thing is that what we now know, because the other part of what I do with clients is I work on flow state neuroscience. And what we actually know is in the opening seconds of a flow state, we will get this arousal in our nervous system, which we can perceive as nerves and fear and anxiety. But when we have the right mental program, we can actually then channel that into higher performance. Because when we feel all of that in our body, what's actually happening is our brain is releasing neurochemicals, like, for example, norepinephrine, which is a focus neurochemical. But often these neurochemicals will make us feel a little anxious, almost nervous. But once we know, hey, this is how I'm meant to feel, this is how I'm meant to respond to these challenging moments, we don't go into choking mode. We actually use that response in our mind and our body to actually perform better, because we actually know that we get into a flow state when we are taken a little above our comfort zone. So again, the really great athletes, some of them will have just been lucky. They've gone through life and their mental programming is on point. But I know from experience, a lot of them, and I work with some of them, they've had to train their minds to respond in that way to pressure. This is the good news. You can train the way you respond to those pressure moments so that instead of feeling anxious about that response in your body, that arousal in your body, which comes across as nerves, you can actually say, hey, this is a good thing. I can actually use this to perform better.
Okay. My brain is really flying right now. Training your mind to respond to pressure, respond positively to pressure, effectively to pressure, optimally to pressure. Training your mind. You can't train your mind unless you know where it's at. So you've got to
Mm.
do an analysis of your subconscious patterns. So the gentleman that you talked about, the client you talked about that had a negative response to unfairness, not everybody's got that.
Yeah,
I've got a son. I've got a son that was that way. He would steal a
yeah,
basketball in a game and he would pickpocket the dribbler and didn't touch the guy, and the official would call a foul.
yeah,
And then he would lose his mind. My son would lose his mind because he's like, "I didn't touch him." I'm like, "It doesn't matter if you touched him. He just thought you did. So if he thought you did in his mind. So we just have to move on." So I had to start teaching him that life is not fair.
yeah.
Expect the officials to make bad calls. They're human. So I want you to go one of two places. Either talk about the analysis of subconscious patterns under pressure, or do you have a fundamental program of these concepts to train your subconscious patterns under pressure?
Yeah. I mean, look, the subconscious patterns tend to show up very similarly across domains. And that's why I teach this wide range of professions. It's the same, as I say, for entrepreneurs, for traders, for lawyers in a courtroom situation, for people who have to negotiate, for professional sports people. The brain operates really, the subconscious, first and foremost in evolutionary terms, is a threat detection system. It's looking for threats the whole time. And as I said earlier, it can tend to exaggerate fear because mercifully, nothing we face in most of our lives, most of the people listening to this podcast will not have an existential threat to face in the way our ancestors did. And that part of our brain hasn't evolved really to be able to skillfully turn that threat detection into something which is a well calibrated response. So we tend to fear loss, we tend to be averse to risk, and that is at the heart of pretty well most of the mental programs I deal with. When, there's some amazing surveys saying people fear public speaking more than death. I mean, how irrational is that? It can't be worse than death no matter how
Right.
badly that speech goes. But, again, an evolutionary pattern there is it was very important to be part of the tribe, and being outcast was basically was death. And so if we do something which feels incredibly embarrassing, if we have to stand on a stage and give a speech or make a pitch and we do it badly, we feel so terrible about it. And yet the rational way of thinking about it is, well, okay, it didn't work. It was important, but it didn't work. Now, obviously, what I'm trying to do with my coaching is make sure that the person optimizes their performance. But part of that is to take the pressure off in the first instance and put it in perspective. Now, but then this is where the subconscious is so important because I think most people could rationally understand, hey, if I make a mistake on the sports field or I make that speech not so well or whatever it is, I know it's not the end of the world. But in that moment, it feels like it's the only thing. It feels like it's so important. Why is that? Well, that's because of the impact of the subconscious. And this is why, for me, this type of coaching is impactful in a way conventional coaching isn't. I don't know whether you've ever seen, there's a great old comedy sketch with Bob Newhart, and he plays the part of a therapist, and the client comes into his office and says, basically, I've got claustrophobia. And he just basically says, okay, I've got two words for you. All this way you're thinking, you feel like you're going to be you're stuck in a box. You've got a fear of being in a box. And he says, just remember these two words, stop it. Like, stop, stop thinking like that. And I honestly think a lot of conventional coaching kind of works like that. It just repeats back to the clients what they already know. Hey, I want to be calm under pressure. Yeah, yeah. Be calm under pressure. Don't worry too much. Well, yeah. If it was that simple, we'd already be doing it. But that subconscious response is automatic. Logic doesn't. The logic of saying, "Hey, it's not the end of the world." It's a useful starting point to put it into perspective, but it's not going to work in the big pressure moments. What you have to do is program that automatic fast thinking response. And that's where the work on the subconscious is so important. And it's almost always driven by fear of a bad outcome, which is an exaggeration. But you can't just deal with it by telling people to stop it like Bob Newhart did.
Okay, so the stop it does work until it doesn't.
Yeah,
It does work. It because your conscious is saying, I'm just going to stop doing that. But then you
yeah,
get in that moment and you fall back into your subconscious beliefs. And so I think I think the conventional systems and approaches works when the guy's on the couch or on the phone, but not when he's in the game, not when he's in the
yeah,
poker mat, not when he's in the courtroom,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
here's something that in sports, coaches talk about the concepts of belief and confidence, and they're kind of blended, they're merged. I don't really think a lot of people have really clearly defined the difference. And so over the years, I've kind of clearly defined belief is only about who you are.
Yeah,
Confidence is about what we do. So belief is a choice you have to make every single morning. I believe in myself. I'm buying stock on me. In poker, I'm going all in on me. But you know what? Confidence is about what you do. It's your skill set. So like you can believe in who you are at the poker table, but if you got a 2 and a 5, and you're playing Texas Hold'em, you can't have confidence in your hand.
yeah,
Okay. Right? So if you got, two blind aces, maybe you're feeling pretty cool about where you're at. But my point is very simple. Confidence can be at different levels for different things. So soccer player, striker, he might be more confident about striking the ball to the far post than the near post. So every time he tries to score because he had some success and confidence at the far post, he always goes far post. Well, he's being scouted by the other manager who says, hey, induce him to go to the near post, and take away the far post, take a step out. So the bottom line is, I think in the subconscious, it really should not be about who you are. It's going to be about what you do and what you can do and what you can't do.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is part of what I do. I mean, okay, so if I was to talk about the way I approach issues with hypnotherapy, what I've touched on so far, if I could give you an analogy, it's a bit like, or a metaphor, it's a bit like you got faulty wiring in the house. You bring in an electrician. And the first thing the electrician says is, okay, I can see there's some old wiring. It needs removing. You get rid of the old wiring. So you get rid of the old mental programs, stories which your brain might be telling you about, hey, if I fail, it means I'm a failure. I'm not a worthy person, or whatever that may be. Or, the one I highlighted before about, hey, when bad things happen, it's because life doesn't treat me fairly. So we get rid of that. But you can't leave, when the electrician comes to your house, you can't just say, well, I'm going to rip the old wiring out. They've got to put new wiring in. And what that new wiring in a mental game situation is about is visualizing what you are going to do. So this is coming back to what you're saying is about, okay, I'm going to visualize what I want to do in this situation. And I will visualize, for example, taking on that shot at the near post, the way you described. Now, they have to go and do the hard work on the practice field. You have to practice from that same angle, trying to hit that space at the near post. Nobody can conjure confidence out of thin air. You have to do the hard work on the training ground, whatever that training ground may be for you. Been working with a trader recently who we really nailed down his trading methodology so that he was absolutely confident that he would in what his plan was when certain trades reach a certain point. Because what he was doing was he was exiting those trades prematurely. And it's very interesting that often I find that when I say to people, how confident are you in your plan in this situation? They'll say, yeah, I'm confident. And I'll say, okay, talk me through it. And it's a bit more fuzzy. It's a bit more fuzzy. I had a professional basketball player who I was working with. In fact, I still am working with. And he came to me at one point and he said, "Hey, I'm not taking shots I know I should be taking." And what we did was we created a very simple mental heuristic for him in certain situations. And it was really simple. As soon as his brain said, "I could take a shot," you're going to take the shot. Because his mind was he was like that footballer I described earlier, Dirk Kuyt. His mind was now taking him too far the other way. He was never taking on the shot. He could always rationalize a reason for not taking the shot. So that was a very simple system. But what I will do with people, coming back to this wiring point, is I will put in a new mental system and we will say, okay, how do you want to think? What do you want to do in this situation? And that might be taking that near post shot. It may be staying in that trade as the trader, and being prepared, incidentally, for it not always to go right. Visualize it going wrong and just being prepared to say, okay, nobody's ever taken a shot at the near post and said it's a guaranteed goal. Football's not that easy. No sport's that easy, right? You've got to be prepared to visualize it not going right, but effectively, not care is too strong a way of putting it, but being able to just say, okay, that was the decision I made. I'm happy with that. I follow that plan. And so you're absolutely right. You have to have confidence to just follow through your process. And that's not the same as saying that your process will always, always give you the result you want. Nothing worth doing, professional sport, entrepreneurship, trading, professional poker, all of these things, there are no guarantees that it's very rare that any one high pressure move is a guaranteed out. It just isn't like that. You've just got to be prepared to trust yourself to follow through that process and accept the consequence. You are making a good risk to reward decision. And once you feel at peace with that, then we come back to the superpower. That's it. You're able to say, okay, it didn't work.
So I use visualization a lot. I coach people on the same thing. And you kind of like clarified for me a little bit more specifically. Visualization can be used to rewire your subconscious for the successful performance of whatever you do.
Yeah,
And when it doesn't work out the way you were hoping it would work out, you're visualizing yourself being okay with the decision you made because it was the right decision.
yeah,
So now you've got two positive mind frames after you do what you do. And if it works or it doesn't, you're still okay.
exactly. Exactly.
And so many people.
We talk in poker about expected value. You make a decision and it has a projected expected value. It's like on the probability you will make X dollars on this decision. And it's the same in sport. Okay, if I go for the far post, the expected value of that is, I will score, in fact, lots of statistics in soccer, for example, now we talk about expected goals or, XG. So I know if I take a shot from here, it's expected to go in zero point 0.4 of the time. So 40% of the time, this will end in a goal if I execute well. That means 60% of the time it misses, but it may still be the right decision. It may still be the right decision to take that shot. And so what we visualize is the process of taking the shot and any technical elements around that so that they're instinctive, but also the mindset of just the freedom to do it and then the acceptance of the outcome. And that then means that your brain doesn't learn the lesson of, oh, I missed, I shouldn't try that again. Because it may, as I say, that shot may have been the right thing. That holding that trade may have been the right decision on an expected value basis.
That is fantastic. Okay. I just looked at the clock, Stephen. We could talk all day, all night for you. What's one thing that I didn't ask you about that you're like, man, I want people to hear this?
I think the main lesson I would take from this, and I learned it myself, is that we can change the way our brain works. We can change the way our brain works in pressure situations. We can change the way our brain works in terms of consistency. There's two big problems, I think, across any high performance domain, be it sport, be it business, be it professions like the law or trading. It's, the big challenges are, yes, the pressure moments, but also how you show up day after day. And you can train your mind to a much higher level. And it was only when I had this kind of coaching myself that it really came home to me that that was the case. The old school idea of you're born with certain qualities, characteristics, mental attributes, and that's it, you're kind of stuck with them, we now know is untrue. Neuroplasticity is a thing. You can change the way your brain works. But the real breakthrough for me was understanding that the subconscious mind is where that change really happens. And without that understanding, I guess I'd have still been stuck in the Bob Newhart stop it approach, which, as I say, for pretty well anyone who's a thinking person who thinks about their own performance, it's a dead end. We normally know what we should be doing, but that gap between knowing what to do and doing it is what mindset coaching is all about.
Amen, brother. Thank you so much for being on Pro Mindset. Where can people find you?
Yeah, they can find me at stephenbaker.coach, Stephen with a PH, or Stephen Baker Performance Coach on Instagram.
Stephen, thank you so much for being on today. And I hope the audience got as much out of this as I did. I really appreciate your intelligence, your perspective, your experience. And everybody out there they don't realize that they're performing in alignment with their subconscious programming.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Well, Craig, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Hey guys, that's a wrap. I want to thank you so much for listening to Pro Mindset Podcast today. I hope you found something that's relevant to you. I hope it's something that maybe can help you be your best in your biggest moments. And if you like the show on all the different platforms, subscribe, like, or share. Go out and have an awesome day today. Go out and have a Pro Mindset day.